In the heart of a Nebraska winter, when snow turned the prairie into a vast white silence, a pair of twin girls did something that would change the course of a grieving father's life. This is not a story of grand gestures or furry romance. It's a story of quiet choice, soft courage, and the long road back to warmth. And it begins on the morning a storm rolled in, and two little girls whispered a secret that could melt even the coldest December. "Papa, we did something." The wind clawed at the window panes like a creature kept too long in the cold. Inside the Boone cabin, the hearth cracked with modest warmth, but the air still carried the weight of winter. Snow pressed against the walls like a second skin, muffling even the restless groan of the trees outside. Matthew Boone stood by the table oil lantern, casting long shadows across his weathered face. He turned slowly toward the voices, two small ones, trembling more from guilt than chill. Clara's boots were dusted with snow, despite never stepping outside, and her sister Millie clutched a piece of fabric, torn from her old doll, like a token of protection. Matthew narrowed his eyes, not yet speaking. He had been mending a bridle fingers thick with old scars when the words came. Now, the leather lay forgotten. Clara's lower lip quivered. She looked at her twin, then stepped forward. "We wrote a letter. We sent it. To the lady in the ad." Matthew's chest tightened. "What ad?" Millie swallowed hard. "The one in Mrs. Ellis's newspaper. The one about ladies looking for good homes and good men." He stared. For a moment, the only sound in the cabin was the hush of snow against the roof. Clara, emboldened by the silence, pressed on. "We wrote her 'cause you stopped laughing. You don't talk like you used to. You forget things. Like how Mama used to brush Millie's hair." Millie stepped closer now, her voice softer than a snowfall. "Mama said, if you ever stopped smiling, we should find someone to help you remember how." Matthew flinched like he'd been struck. He opened his mouth, closed it. His hands fell to his sides. The letter, the ad. Some old wrinkled piece of newsprint a neighbor brought by months ago, left lying near the hearth. He hadn't thought twice when the girls asked to play pretend post office. He rubbed a hand over his face. "And what exactly did you write?" Clara fumbled in her pocket and drew out a crumpled second copy, the practice version. The ink was blotched letters, uneven. "We told her we needed a mommy," Clara whispered. "And that Papa's kind, just sad. We said we'd help with chores and learn our letters. We told her the train from Lincoln came Fridays." Matthew's voice came low, and she answered. Two heads nodded. She said she'd come today. A silence longer than any sermon settled in the room. Outside, the wind howled against the eaves like it had caught scent of something living. Matthew looked toward the door, jaw tight, then back at the girls. They stared at him with eyes too large, too knowing for 7. He wasn't angry. Or rather, he was, but not at them. At time. At grief. At the raw, open wound winter had become. "Get your coats," he said at last. Clara blinked. "You mean, you're really... I'm not leaving her standing out in this storm." He snapped, then softer. "Even if I didn't ask for her." The wagon creaked under the weight of wet snow as they rode toward the station. Clara and Millie sat huddled under a wool blanket, their breath fogging the air. Matthew kept his eyes on the narrow trail, reins in hand, heart somewhere between dread and duty. He told himself he'd explain the mistake, put her back on the next train if she'd go. But part of him knew better. No one traveled this far in winter without desperation riding beside them. When they reached the station, the place was near deserted. A battered sign swung in the wind, half frozen in place. Snow danced like ghosts across the tracks. Matthew stepped down first, lifting both girls after. They stood close, scanning the platform. Then a hiss. The train's whistle pierced the air like a blade. Steam rolled in white waves as the locomotive slowed, wheels groaning. Doors opened. A few men in heavy coats disembarked, heads down, steps quick. Then she appeared. She stepped down from the last car, her frame slight beneath a coal-colored cloak. A bonnet shielded most of her face, but wisps of auburn hair escaped at her temple. In one hand she held a worn leather bag, the other pressed to her chest as she squinted through the flurries. Clara gasped. "That's her." Before Matthew could speak, both girls dashed forward. The woman startled as two small bodies collided with her skirts. "We're Clara and Millie. You came. You really came." Matthew approached slowly, heart thudding. The woman looked up. Her eyes found his, uncertain, guarded but not afraid. She opened her mouth to speak, but Millie got there first, her voice full of wonder. "We told her she could be our mommy." A stranger on the platform. A promise made by children. A man caught between pride and compassion. If this beginning stirred something in you, subscribe to follow what happens when one unexpected arrival starts to thaw more than just the winter outside. The ride home was swallowed by silence. Snow tapped against the canvas cover of the wagon, like fingers too cold to knock. Evelyn sat beside the girls in the back, her gloved hands wrapped tightly around her bag. Clara leaned against her side, unbothered, eyes bright. Millie had fallen asleep against Evelyn's shoulder, breath shallow and soft, as if peace could still be found in a stranger's warmth. But across the seat at the front, Matthew Boone sat like stone. He did not look back. The road wound through the white-drenched prairie, past fences half buried and trees stripped to the bone. The horses' hooves beat a slow, steady rhythm, but the stillness between them all was heavier than the snow-laden skew. They reached the cabin. Matthew helped the girls down, then turned to Evelyn. His eyes flicked to her face but didn't linger. "Bring your things," he said, voice flat. "Storm's coming quicker than expected." Inside, the air was warm from the hearth, but not welcoming. The cabin smelled of pine and smoke, and Evelyn took it in, like one takes in the hush of a church, quietly with caution. She stepped into the space, slowly taking stock. The worn braided rug, the iron stove, the hooks by the door, filled with coats too small for her. No one offered to take her bag. No one said welcome. Matthew strode past her, hanging up his hat and coat. "You'll sleep in the girls' room tonight. There's a cot." Evelyn looked toward the twins, now giggling as they removed their boots. But even their joy dulled when Matthew muttered, "Don't make a fuss." It was only then she realized she was not wanted here. The girls had called her yes, but the man, the father, had not. She was a puzzle piece forced into a space she did not shape. And yet here she was, snow-dusted, aching, and far from anywhere she could call safe. She drew a breath. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, Mr. Boone. I can try for the coach to Hastings come morning, weather allowing." Matthew didn't meet her eyes. "You won't get 10 miles in this storm. Roads will be gone by nightfall." A pause. Then, without warmth, "You can stay the night. A few days. But understand, this is not a place for dreams." Evelyn's fingers curled tighter around her bag. "I understand," she said softly. The hours passed in quiet labor. The girls showed her the wash basin, the spare quilt, and the tin cup with a chip along the rim. They asked endless questions which Evelyn answered patiently, even as she watched Matthew retreat to his corner of the house like a shadow that belonged to no one. At dinner, the table felt too big for 4. The food was plain but filling, stew with salted pork and potatoes. The girls chattered. Evelyn smiled when she could. Matthew barely touched his bowl. She caught him watching her hands, neat, folded, foreign, watching the way she chewed, as if trying to measure the weight of her existence in spoonfuls. He didn't speak, unless to the girls. And when Millie, bright-eyed and proud, said, "Miss Evelyn's hair is the color of cinnamon," Matthew muttered, "Eat your supper." That night, the snow began to fall harder. Outside, the world vanished into white. Evelyn sat on the edge of the cot, brushing out her damp hair. The room was small, 2 little beds against the wall, a trunk with a cracked lid, and drawings taped crookedly above the fireplace. Stick figures, a woman with long hair, a man with no face, and she reached into her bag and pulled out the letters. Their letters, crumpled slightly from travel. She unfolded the last one and read it again by lamplight. We promise we're good girls. We don't fight, and we help our papa with chores. He is very kind, but he forgot how to smile after Mama went to heaven. Could you come show him how? We think maybe you can. Evelyn pressed the paper to her chest. She had come with the hope of building something new. A home. A second chance. But what she found was a man who looked at her like a stranger at his door, not a woman stepping into a promise. Still, where else could she go? Hastings was 2 days by coach, and she had no one there but a former employer's cousin, who barely remembered her name. She was not so proud as to brave a blizzard on borrowed names. Evelyn leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes. A soft sound woke her, barely a whisper. The wind had howled for hours, but this was different. Muffled, rhythmic, like breath caught between hiccups. She slipped from the cot and padded quietly across the wooden floor, lifting the quilt curtain to the adjoining room. There on the bed nearest the window, Millie lay, curled tight, her small shoulders trembling. Evelyn knelt beside her. "Millie," she whispered. The girl sniffled, then turned cheeks wet. "I'm sorry," she hiccuped. "I didn't mean to make trouble." Evelyn's heart tightened. She reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind the girl's ear. "You didn't cause trouble, sweet pea." Millie blinked. "But Papa's mad. He didn't want you to come." Evelyn paused, then smiled, gentle and warm. "No. But sometimes grown-ups don't know what they need until someone reminds them." Millie's eyes shimmered. "I just wanted him to laugh again. I wanted a mama who could stay." Evelyn smoothed her thumb along Millie's cheek. "You were only trying to find love." Millie shifted closer, her fingers wrapping around Evelyn's. Her breathing slowed, and within minutes, she drifted into sleep. Evelyn remained there a while longer, staring at the snow beyond the window. Somewhere in the other room, Matthew's footsteps creaked faintly across the floor, then stopped. They were strangers still, but even strangers could share a roof when the wind howled like wolves. And sometimes love came quietly, like the sound of a little girl falling asleep, fingers tucked in yours. Daylight struggled to pierce the gray sky. When Evelyn stepped outside to fetch flour from Mrs. Harrow's general store, the wind still tugged at her cloak, and the journey was a short one, but for her, the weight of it felt far greater than a single block. She carried the tin bucket, its rim dented, just as her heart felt hollow with every step. As she entered the store, the heat wrapped around her like reluctant acceptance. Sacks of flour and sugar lined the shelves, and the hum of other women, huddled by the pot-bellied stove, trailed off. Their eyes flicked to her, then looked away, harsh and silent. Mrs. Kemp, Matthew's sister-in-law, rose from her chair, a shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. Evelyn braced herself for the cold. Mrs. Kemp's voice was soft, but razor-sharp beneath its veneer. "Now don't go thinking that staying in his house makes you a Boone," she drawled. "A mousy woman in mourning clothes playing house, while his wife and son lie buried back east." The words skated across Evelyn's skin. Her heartbeat slowed. She had half expected a slight, but the intrusion of the dead into her living cut deeper. She searched for words, but the store seemed to narrow around her. Nobody in their right mind socializes with the man who lost his family, unless there is something to be gained, Mrs. Kemp added with a sideways look that made Evelyn shiver. A hush fell. The women glanced at each other. Children peeked from behind barrels, whispering, "The bride with no wedding." Evelyn lifted the bucket as though it might shield her. She swallowed hard-pressed lips that now felt too fragile. Yet she didn't flee. Instead, she recalled why she had come in the first place: to bake, to offer warmth. So she nodded and forced a small smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Kemp. I'll be careful." She turned and left the store with her purchase, each step heavy with the weight of curious glances. Back home, the girls greeted her at the door. "Miss Evelyn," Clara exclaimed, tossing her hair. "Can we learn to write proper letters today?" Millie shyly held out a scrap of paper, showing messy loops. "I wrote Mama once." Evelyn's heart ached at the fragility. Here in the safety of their home, the world outside fell away. She led them to the wooden table, sank into a chair that had once belonged to their mother. "Of course," she said, softening. She retrieved a stubby pencil from her bag, an old gift from a past she rarely voiced. For the next hour, the cabin filled with gentle concentration. Evelyn guided their hands, slowly tracing letters on rough brown paper. Their laughter rose again, not at the floor, not too loud, but enough to sew a new thread of belonging into the evening. Through the window, snow skidded against the glass, muffling the world outside, while inside, the trio built something fragile and true. Noon came masked in gloom, and Evelyn ventured outside again to feed the chickens, to stretch the widening space between her heart and the world that questioned her presence. A horse-drawn wagon passed by. Mrs. Kemp was there, hard-faced, clipboard in hand. Later, Evelyn watched from the window. She saw her face turn toward the house, as if she practiced lines. Then she raised her chin deliberately. The wariness worried Evelyn, but she took no step down the front steps to confront her. That evening, the quiet was fractured by a sharp knock. Matthew answered. Evelyn found him in the parlor, tired eyes hollow. Mrs. Kemp slipped in like a shadow. She unfolded a crisp piece of parchment and laid it on the little table between them. "This is a request for you to sign over guardianship of your daughters permanently to me," she said flatly. "You, sir, are not fit to raise them alone. This letter is drawn under law, given your condition." Matthew's eyes flickered to the girl's door, then back to the worn paper. His hand trembled in the dim light. Evelyn stepped forward. "Mr. Boone," she said softly, "they belong to you." Mrs. Kemp gave Evelyn a cold smile. A convenient sentiment for an inconvenient stranger. Matthew swallowed, jaw clenched. He stared at the paper as though it might ignite beneath his gaze. "No," he said at last, voice low. "I will not sign this. My children stay where their father stays." He exhaled, chest tight. "Even if the rest of the world thinks otherwise." He looked at Evelyn, not angrily, but with a sad sort of recognition. A father lighting the shadows in his view again, maybe. Inside the thin walls of that cabin, bread rising on the morning hearth, letters in messy blue pencil, and the man who refused to yield an inch of his home, a fragile peace took root. Evelyn had become the stranger they whispered about, and yet she remained, coaxing joy into small hearts, bearing the silent test of social judgment. And in that stillness, something like hope stirred once more. The wind howled low that night, threading through the cracks in the cabin, like a memory refusing to be forgotten. The hearth glowed softly, casting long, flickering shadows against the wooden floor. Evelyn sat near the fire, her hands still a woolen sock, turned inside out in her lap. Outside, the world was wrapped in snow and silence. Inside, her thoughts smoldered like coals too stubborn to die. Matthew had taken the girls to bed early. The house was quiet now, save the occasional creak of settling wood and the soft hiss of the flames. Evelyn stared into them, letting the heat kiss her cheeks, trying to keep old ghosts from finding her. "My mother used to knit by the fire," she said aloud, not knowing if she expected a reply. Matthew's voice came from the corner where he was oiling a lantern. "Was she good at it?" Evelyn gave a small smile. "She made scarves, one for every winter. My favorite was sky blue. I wore it every day for 3 years straight, even when spring came." He glanced over. "What happened to it?" She looked down, folding the sock slowly. "The fire took the whole house with it. And them." The silence deepened. Not an awkward silence, but one that gave safeties. Matthew didn't press further. He only nodded once and returned to his lantern hand steady. Days passed like snowflakes, soft, slow, and accumulating. One morning, Matthew stepped into the parlor and found Evelyn seated by the window, mending a scarf. The yarn was mismatched gray against cream, but her stitching was careful, each loop, even each pull gentle. It was Clara's scarf snagged on a fence post the day before. He recognized it. She looked up briefly, her eyes calm, and offered a smile that didn't ask for approval. That night, he noticed the boots she had left by the door, his late wife's boots now worn by Evelyn. The heel was torn. By morning, it was mended, the seam reinforced with a shoemaker's stitch. Evelyn didn't say anything, but she wore them differently that day. Straighter, steadier. Small things began to appear. A mug of black coffee set at his place, even if she wasn't sure how he took it. A jar of jam on the table with no explanation. A braid retied on Millie's head, with a scrap of ribbon Evelyn must have salvaged from an old dress. One dawn, Evelyn rose to find her own boots scuffed and too tight, placed by the stove, newly oiled and stretched. A tin cup sat beside them, filled with warm coffee, steam curling like breath. She stared at it for a long while, before taking the cup and whispering, "Thank you," to no one in particular. That evening, while the girls played with wooden dolls by the rug, Evelyn read aloud from a worn Bible she'd found on the shelf. Her voice was soft, unhurried. Millie curled up by her side. Clara laid her head on her father's lap. The room felt whole. Later, while clearing the table, Clara tugged at Evelyn's sleeve and handed her a folded paper. On it, drawn with crooked lines and bright colors, was a family of four: a tall man, two little girls with bows in their hair, and a woman with golden curls and a smile. Evelyn traced the outline gently. "Who's this?" she asked. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "It's our family. That's you, if you stay." Evelyn felt something in her chest shift, not a sharp pain, but the soft pull of roots taking hold. She folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. Then, without a word, she pulled Clara close. Outside, the wind howled on. But inside, the fire never once flickered. The sky turned white without warning. By mid-morning, the clouds had sunk low and heavy over the prairie, swallowing the distant tree line. Snow began to fall with the hush of secrets, whispering against the windows of the Boone cabin. Evelyn watched it from the kitchen, her hands still damp from washing. A strange ache stirred in her chest, the kind that came with the weight of words unspoken. The night before, she and Matthew had spoken in hushed tones by the fire. She had mentioned the name of a cousin in Denver, a place to go if things here grew too uncertain. Her words were careful, hypothetical. But a child's ear doesn't parse intention, only sound. Millie had heard. Now the storm rolled in, cloaking the world in white, and Millie was gone. It was Clara who noticed first. She tugged at Evelyn's skirt, eyes wide, voice shaking. "She's not in the room. She's not anywhere." Evelyn's breath caught. She flew through the house, calling Millie's name, flinging open the cellar door, peering behind curtains, beneath beds. The scarf Millie had worn that morning was missing. So were her boots. Matthew came in from the barn as Evelyn stood in the doorway, chest heaving, hands trembling. She didn't need to speak. The panic in her face told him everything. "She heard us," Evelyn said, barely above a whisper. "Last night. She thought I was leaving." Matthew didn't ask questions. He turned on his heel, grabbed two lanterns, his coat, and the heavy wool cloak from the peg. Evelyn was already pulling on her shawl. "You can't go out there," he said, but it was too late. "I have to." She ran because of me. Snow lashed against them the moment they stepped off the porch. The wind pushed sideways, biting through wool and skin alike. Matthew held one lantern, Evelyn the other, their boots crunching through the thickening drifts as they moved across the yard toward the tree line. "Where would she go?" he shouted. "There's a place," Evelyn called back. "Clara told me once. It's where their mother used to read stories. A tree with a split trunk. Like a seat." Matthew's jaw tightened. North fence, past the creek. They pressed forward every step a battle. The lanterns swung in their hands, casting golden orbs that barely pierced the white curtain of snow. Evelyn's skirts soaked through in minutes. Her fingers numbed around the lantern's handle, but she kept moving. She had known the child only weeks, but Millie had slipped into her heart like breath and into lungs. Evelyn had braided her hair in the mornings, sung her to sleep, traced laughter in her drawings. And now the thought of her lost out in the storm sent Evelyn's heart thudding with a kind of panic she hadn't felt since the fire years ago, the helplessness of arriving too late. Please, she thought, let me find her in time. The wind howled through the cottonwoods, eerie and hollow. Branches creaked and groaned above them. Then at last a break in the trees, a clearing, and the shape of a familiar cedar, its trunk split wide, gnarled like outstretched arms. Beneath it, something small and unmoving. Millie Evelyn dropped the lantern, snow spraying up around her knees as she lunged forward. The girl lay curled tight, scarf pulled over her face, boots soaked. Her shoulders trembled, and her breath came in small, sharp gasps. Millie, sweetheart. Evelyn dropped to her knees, hands cupping the child's face, brushing ice from her lashes. Millie blinked, eyes glassy with cold. I thought you didn't want to stay. Evelyn gathered her close, wrapping the shawl around both of them, rocking gently. I'm not leaving, she said, voice thick with tears. Not unless I carry you with me. Behind her, Matthew arrived, his shadow falling over them. He knelt, strong arms reaching to lift Millie from Evelyn's grasp. She's freezing, he said, his voice raw. We have to get her home. Evelyn didn't let go, not yet. And Matthew, watching her cling to the child with such fierce tenderness, felt something loosen in his chest, a certainty that maybe, just maybe, she belonged here, more than he had dared to believe. She pressed her cheek against Millie's damp hair, whispering over and over, you are loved, little one. You are not alone. Together they carried her through the storm, each step a shared burden, through deepening snow and howling wind. Matthew's arm braced Evelyn as her boots slipped on icy ground, while she cradled Millie close, shielding the child's face from the bitter cold. The storm fought them, but they leaned into it side by side, a silent pact forged in frost and fear. Lanterns swinging, hearts pounding the cabin, rising from the snow like a beacon. And for the first time, Evelyn felt like she wasn't just braving the storm. She was weathering it with someone. Morning came, pale and quiet. The storm had passed, but the prairie lay hushed beneath a heavy blanket of snow. Evelyn emerged from the girls' room to find the cabin transformed not by weather, but by small gestures that spoke louder than words. In the parlor, Matthew was at the window polishing the glass. His breath formed a fragile mist on the pane, and outside, the wind tugged at the drifts. Evelyn paused, watching him smooth away frost in long, precise motions, as though clearing the way for something unseen. He turned then, and without glancing at her, advanced to the hearth. With steady hands he stoked the coals and piled on fresh logs. The fire deepened, warming the room, and perhaps something hardened in his chest. Earlier that morning, Matthew had paused beside the hearth, his eyes drawn to a child's drawing, tacked above the mantel, Clara's sketch of their family. In the center, Evelyn stood holding hands with both girls. He had stared at it longer than he meant to, something catching in his chest. He remembered a time when Mary used to sketch scenes just like that, soft little dreams inked in charcoal beside the fire. But this one was different. This one held a future that had formed without his asking. And yet, it felt possible. Tacked above the mantel, Clara's sketch of their family. In the center, Evelyn stood holding hands with both girls. He had stared at it longer than he meant to, something catching in his chest. Evelyn watched silently as he retrieved a folded cloth from a nail by the wall. It was the apron, worn clean and carefully pressed. She used to wear this every day, Matthew said, his voice catching slightly, as if the memory still carried weight, quietly. My wife, I mean. I wasn't sure if it was too soon, but you've already mended more than clothes. I think it's yours now." Evelyn stared in disbelief, her heart rising like a trapped bird. The apron was simple, heavy cotton, threadbare at the edges, but freshly washed and folded, as if it belonged to someone she already was. She took it in trembling hands, fingers brushing the seam stained from years of meals and mending. Tears pricked her eyes, silent and shimmering. "Thank you," she whispered, voice catching. Matthew didn't say more. Instead, he turned back to the window, eyes settling somewhere past the drifting snow. Evelyn pressed the apron to her chest, the fabric damp with emotion. She moved toward the kitchen to help with breakfast. The girls entered, faces bright. Millie spotted the apron. Then Clara grasped Evelyn's arm. "Does that mean—" Clara began, voice hopeful. Millie's question came softly. "Then you're really our mommy." Evelyn knelt, folding the apron with reverence. She held Clara's small hands and looked into her expectant face. "If you'll have me," she answered, voice steady yet soft. Clara threw her arms around Evelyn's neck. Millie joined, squeezing close each breath, a quiet vow. They ate breakfast in easy silence. The midday sun filtered through snow-muted light, falling in luminous strips across the floorboards. The fire cracked softly, echoing the warmth blooming in the room. Matthew stood nearby watching them. A faint warmth stirred in his chest. As he took in the sight, the apron resting on Evelyn's waist, the girl's arms wrapped around her, their voices soft with belonging. He hadn't expected this, hadn't dared to, but the quiet joy unfolding before him felt like something he no longer wanted to live without. And though no words passed, something passed between them, a fragile unspoken bond forming in the hush of flower dust and morning light. Outside, the wind thawed around the doorframe, carried in by the warmth that radiated from the cabin. For the first time, Evelyn felt its invitation in her bones. She belonged. She straightened the apron, not out of obligation, but with quiet pride. The snow did not vanish overnight. It lingered in the hollows and shadows, clinging to the fence posts and pooling like white breath beneath the trees. But there were signs. The path to the well was no longer solid ice, just patches of slush and firm earth. The sound of water trickling beneath the barn signaled that something beneath the world was waking up. Evelyn stood on the porch, sleeves rolled, and a basket of damp linens at her hip. As she watched the girls laugh and race across the yard, she felt a quiet ache rise in her chest, not from sorrow, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization of how far they had all come. From that bitter day at the station to this soft morning, the distance wasn't measured in miles, but in warmth, reclaimed trust rebuilt, and the fragile threads of family stitched back together. Millie and Clara ran back and forth between the line and the tub, pinning up tea towels and pillowcases with exaggerated care. Their laughter rose like birdsong, a lightness that hadn't touched the house in years. "Don't let it fall in the mud," Evelyn called as Millie's cloth fluttered loose. The girl caught it with a squeal and a grin. Behind them, the prairie stretched wide and golden beneath the melting sky. The sharp edge of winter had dulled, replaced by air that tasted faintly of thaw and earth. Later that morning, Evelyn returned with a small tin box of drawing pencils from the general store, a quiet gift tucked into her coat. Millie's eyes lit up at the sight, and Clara leaned close already, whispering what to draw. That afternoon, while Evelyn baked cornbread and stirred stew, the girls worked quietly by the window. When they finished, they brought the pictures to her, 2 pages, wrinkled and smudged at the corners. One was of a house simple and square, smoke curling from its chimney. The second showed 3 figures holding hands. No names written, just lines and colors soft and sure. As the sun dipped low, Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. She pressed a thumbtack through the corners and hung the pictures from the beam just above the rocking chair. They fluttered gently in the warming breeze, small testaments to a new kind of permanence. Inside, Matthew watched. He had returned from checking the south lot boots, muddy hat, dusted with thaw. He didn't speak as he crossed the threshold, just looked. His gaze lingered on the porch, then moved inward, taking in the stew simmering on the stove, the girls curled with a book on the rug, Evelyn at the counter rinsing a jar. His eyes settled on the space by the kitchen table. There, untouched for months, was Mary's old chair. The wood dulled, a leg slightly uneven. Matthew walked over, picked it up with both hands, and carried it toward the table. As he moved, a quiet pulse echoed in his chest. Not quite grief, not quite hope, but something tender in between. It was just a chair, and yet it felt like the final brick in a wall, slowly being rebuilt. He wiped it clean with a cloth from the sink, straightened the uneven leg with a shim of folded paper, then set it gently beside the others. He didn't speak. Evelyn didn't either. But her eyes glistened. That evening, they ate with the windows open a crack, letting in the scent of earth and the faint far-off rush of creek water. Clara reached for more bread. Millie recited a new rhyme she'd learned. Matthew poured Evelyn a second cup of tea, it without needing to ask. The snow had not melted from the world yet. But in this home, it was just as it had the day Evelyn first stepped through that door with snow in her hair and uncertainty in her eyes. Now, where silence once sat, warmth had taken root. The storm had passed, and in its place something sounder remained. Have you ever found yourself in the wrong place, only to realize it was exactly where you were meant to be? This story isn't just about Evelyn or a snow-covered prairie cabin. It's about every moment we thought we were lost, until a hand reached out, a fire was lit, or a child whispered, "You can stay." Maybe you've never stood in a Nebraska blizzard, but perhaps like Evelyn, you've stood at the edge of something broken and wondered if love had forgotten your name. This is for anyone who's ever needed a second chance, not wrapped in a promise, but in a quiet cup of tea, a mended boot, and a chair pulled up just for you. If this story touched you, consider subscribing to the channel. Here we share simple yet profound love stories about souls who seemed lost, but somehow found each other amid the dust and wind of the Old West. Your subscription helps us keep the fire burning for tales as warm and heartfelt as this one.